Good afternoon YouTube and welcome back to the channel. And in today's video, the E92 M3, the daily that is not so much a daily anymore. And in today's video, we're going to go through the things I love, the things I hate, and ultimately is now the perfect time to buy an E92 M3. As mentioned a few years ago, I created a video on this exact car of all the things that I'd learned in the very short period. I think it was like a year after I bought it that I'd picked up, and I joined the forums. You see, you hear the horror stories, and what I do have to stress is obviously you always hear the bad news over the good news, but sadly there are a lot of truths in it. So we're going to discuss that in today's video. And I'm going to start by saying why I think now is the perfect time to buy an E92 M3. And I'm sure there's a lot of you sitting at home going, yep, last naturally aspirated M3, the only V8, it's only going to go up in value. So of course now is the time to buy one before they all skyrocket. But that's not the reason I think you should buy an E92 M3 today. They're a mass production car. I don't think they're going to spike anytime soon. I still think we're on the cuff of a big recession coming, and as living costs increase, they're still going to drop a little bit further, like many other performance cars. But the reason I say you should buy one now is I just think the roads are changing. And I don't mean that because the potholes are worse than ever. I say it because if you're buying a car like this, you're buying it to have a bit of fun. Not always to be stupid, but it goes to 8,300 RPM as stock. It loves to be revved. The gearbox makes you punch through the gears. And what you need to remember now is dash cams are everywhere. People are always submitting footage. I know people who have been caught with dash cams, and also the new cameras that are coming out with the noise detection on them, and this has become a big thing in the biking world. And if you've heard this car, it's got the back box modification that we did in another video. It's got the pre-cat delete. It does make a wonderful noise to my ears, but unfortunately, as the world moves towards electric cars and more cars do become electric, this car stands out. And as these noise meters are going in, I've definitely seen them in the area where I take the motorbikes, you're going to start receiving points, fines for having a loud vehicle, and you'll get to the point where you think, well, the government has forced me into driving an electric car just because it's going to be pointless having a car like this that makes no noise at all. And I'm not saying that's going to happen tomorrow, but I think 5 years down the road, it's going to be a different world out there to what it was 5 years before that. And for that reason, I think if you've got a V8 itch or something with a big engine that you want to enjoy, you want to hear sing with the windows down, now's the time to do it. Let me know in the comments, what do you guys think? Am I right in what I'm saying? Should I move to the middle of nowhere in Wales? That's always been the dream, but the missus won't unfortunately follow that goal. But where I am, which is just outside of London, is definitely changing, and it's definitely not for the better for petrol heads. Also moving on with why now is the perfect time to buy an E92 M3 is things have advanced that you can repair these cars a lot cheaper than you used to be able to when they were 3, 4, 5 years old. Specialists have made parts that work better. Look at Jason at rebuild.org. Now makes the throttle actuators for £450 for the pair, much cheaper than going to BMW and spending £2,000 if they fail. There are also new problems that have come to light. Much like the E96 M3, we got issues in the back, and not with the boot floor this time. It's actually the rear subframes that are starting to rot and fall apart, and that is not a 2-minute job to repair. The problem is I've seen more than one case online now of people dropping the subframe, having holes in them, they're splitting around the mounting points, where it's not a strength issue, it's a corrosion issue. And as soon as they corrode, they become weak, they rust, and they start falling apart. And I think as the years go on, it's going to become more and more of a problem. You could obviously prevent it by dropping the subframe down, powder coating it all, replating it all, which is what I plan to do with this, and go with the monoball upgrade, but that's going to be in a later episode, that's not in today. But it's definitely something that's becoming more and more of an issue, and obviously the roads are going to continue to be salted throughout the winters as these cars roll on to 15 years old. I think we're going to see a lot more rust issues, and it's going to be in the same boat as the E46, unfortunately. The Vanos caps, well, if you open your oil filter cap and you look inside, you can see at the end of the camshaft pulley there's a plastic cap on it, and there's now been cases of these failing as well. So the beauty of it is, on the right hand side, the driver's side bank, you can open the oil filler cap and have a look in there, and you can see it, and if it's intact, it's a good indication. The problem is you can't see the other bank, so if it does fail, it chews itself to pieces. It can obviously go down into the sump, get sucked up into the oil pump because it's all just plastic. This isn't a big thing at the moment, but it's certainly something I'm aware of. There are already companies producing aftermarket parts. I'm sure there'll be those in the comments saying more people making money out of parts that haven't failed. But for me, if you open the oil filler cap and yours hasn't failed, I'm going to roll and say it'll be okay. The fuel injectors. Well, I mentioned this briefly in the 1 year recap video, 3 years ago now? Injector failure. Now, this isn't common for the E92s, it's more known on the V10 M5s, and what essentially happens is the injectors stick open, flood a bore, make an absolute mess of everything, and it's an engine rebuild. Now, I've only heard of 3 cases of this happening, and that has become a big issue. I'm not just putting it out there to try and make a video to scaremonger, but I've seen more and more cases of these failing and just causing engines to absolutely explode because they hydrolock, because you can't compress all the fuel that's in there, and just destroys the motor. And I've actually done a video on this, and preventative maintenance for a set of 8 new injectors, they don't require coding, you can buy them directly from Bosch, is under £300. So for me, it's madness not to do it. There are still many people who believe it's a fuel filter issue. There are others like me that believe it's to do with a failing component inside the injector. But ultimately, for that cost, considering to replace an engine is what, £6,000 to £10,000 here in the UK, you'd be mad not to get it done. Much like the rod bearings, and we're not going to get in that in today's video because the earlier video I did still stands that they are a weak point, they are a tight clearance, they are running 10 weight 60 oil, which wears them out quickly in the winter. And if you are going to keep the car long term, you'd be mad not to get it done. Just for that peace of mind, sending it all the way to 8,600 RPM with the remap I've got on here, rolling the dice if they haven't been changed. So we'll move on to the things I love about the E92 M3. Well, it's definitely that V8. It is the party piece of the car, and with a remap, it goes all the way to 8,600 RPM. That's 400 RPM off a GT3 and a Ferrari 458, which you ain't getting anywhere near that RPM, cylinder capacity and V8 layout without spending 40, 50,000 pounds realistically, whereas you can pick these up for 15, 20,000 pounds, providing obviously you've got all the basics like the shells and that done. It's a pretty solid motor, and as I say, I'm now coming up to 81,000 miles and it still sounds as good as the day I picked it up. The DCT gearbox, the dual clutch transmission. For those that have seen some of my other videos where I took out the new M4 with the ZF 8-speed slosh box, what a massive disappointment. And to have the DCT coupled with a naturally aspirated V8, it's just a match made in heaven. The noise, the way it blips coming down the box, the way it shifts going up the box, honestly, absolutely fantastic. A mechanical limited slip differential in the rear, the last M car to have that. All the new ones now, to my knowledge, are all electronically activated, and they do seem to be working, but a proper mechanical diff, it's just goes back to that analog driver days. And ultimately they're not the best diffs. There are uprated ones that you can put in there, but I've removed the friction modifier from mine, and I must say it hooks up absolutely lovely. And I think that will be something as time goes on, electrical gremlins become more and more of an issue with modern cars, that it'll be another thing that you need to throw away or replace. The handling for such an old car, I mean, they are getting old now, and I've got to do the rear subframe on this and monoball all the rear, and I do want to replace all the arms in the front. But I must say, for the mileage this car's done, 80,000 miles, it still handles so well. It's such a pleasure to drive, and it feels so planted on the road. What I've said in other videos where I did the E46 versus the E92 comparison is the E92 M3 chassis, for me, it just feels like a car that wants to take speed. It loves high speed maneuvers, whereas it's not as tight and nimble as the E46, but when you get it out on the open, even flowing A roads, on the motorway, it just feels so planted that the confidence it puts back into the driver, for me, is just absolutely fantastic. The final love for the E92, I mean, there's a few things I could go on to, but that I'm going to cover in this video, is just the car and the cabin. The beauty of this car is you can drive it every day. Granted, the roll cage is a bit extreme, and it's a wonderful place to be. The Harman Kardon sound system's awesome. The seating, it still feels like premium luxury, even with it being a 2011 model. But a flick of the M button is just a riot. You can have such a good laugh on your favourite bit of road, and then hit traffic, press the M button, put it all back into comfort, carry on your normal way. And I think the Jekyll and Hyde of the E92 M3 makes it a pretty special car. Whereas for me, when I took out the new G Series M4, incredibly fast, but it just didn't egg me on, even in the M modes, to be like, yeah, take it by the scruff of the neck, put it in manual, rev it out. It's just a quick car. It was a quick car, and I think maybe it's me because I'm an older generation that likes natural aspirate. I like revving stuff, whereas some of the comments I read, people are like, it's fast, it does everything, it destroy an E92 M3. And for me, yeah, 420 horsepower that this car put out on the dyno, by today's standards, isn't fast. My friend's got an M4 he's putting hybrid turbos on. It's like 700 horsepower. I'd blow this out the water, but ultimately, how fast do you want to go on the road for me? And I don't think, like as we mentioned in the intro as to why now is the time to buy an E92 M3, where are you going to unleash a 700 horsepower? I'm sure there's going to be those in the comments that say, oh no, loads of places, and I'm sure there is, but are you going to have a lot of fun exploiting that? Who knows? Moving on to the things that I dislike about the E92 M3. I think the biggest one for me is probably the fuel tank size, because obviously it's just a standard 3 Series fuel tank, but it's in an engine that unfortunately does 18 to 20 miles to the gallon. So typically I get about 200 miles to a full tank, which isn't horrific, but it's not great range in the grand scheme of things. It'd be nice if you could achieve a comfortable 300 miles out of the fuel tank. But the other thing that ties in with that is when I bought this, the fuel light bong used to come on at about a quarter of a tank, because in most cars you still got 40 miles. In this it's actually about 20, and thankfully Matt managed to code it so it came on much later, because I hate that BMW bong. It sends the fear into any BMW owner's mind instantly as soon as you hear it. But yeah, fuel tank range is definitely not one of the great things on this car, unfortunately. The cold start, oh man, I'm so glad I got rid of this when I had the car mapped. When you fire it up in the morning, it holds at 1100 RPM, wakes all the neighbours up when I used to leave the house at 5 in the morning, and at the same time you're also potentially doing a lot of damage to the rod bearings, which are the shells, by running an engine up that high in the RPM in the freezing cold just to pass the emissions. So really happy I had that coded out. The bonnet gaps, oh man, they drive me mad. I have played around with this bonnet so many times, which I covered in another video, which I'll link at the end, when I did the square setup on the wheels, removing the plastic latches just to get it to sit that little bit better. And I thought it might have just been me, but it is apparent that a lot of people suffer with this bonnet gap issue, just causing it to stick too high, low from the bumper, but there are ways to improve it by using washers, etc., which has made a big difference. And like I say, you don't really notice it on camera, especially if you look back on my older videos, but every time I used to wash the car, I'd be like, need to try and work that out, which we did find a solution for, which again is detailed at the end of the video. No dipstick is another big thing I really dislike with the E92 M3. It's done on an electronic sensor. You've got about 8.5 litres of oil in the engine, and ultimately you do rely on the computer to tell you whether it's running low. Thankfully for me, mine doesn't seem to use any oil between its every 6,000 mile or 1 year service, but it is nice to have a manual dipstick just to be able to pull out and check, because you never really know if the sensor's failed until you get that dreaded oil pressure light to say it's game over. The weight, another big one on this. I mean, you look online and it varies absolutely everywhere. I've not put this car on the scales, but from what I've read, it's 16 to 1700 kilos, which for a car that doesn't make a great amount of torque, it's not ideal. I really wish they'd have got this down to sub 1500 kilos. It would have been one awesome thing, especially when you think it's got things like the carbon roof, it's got plastic front wings. It was on the right path to being a light car, but if they'd have got that down, this thing would have been an absolute monster. Imagine one of these at like 1350, 1400 kilos, a proper dedicated CSL. I know the GTS exists, but it's more of a race car with a cage. But if they'd have done an E92 CSL, what could have been the possibilities? I've seen the, is it the CT or the CRT? Yeah, CRT E92 M3, which has got lighter seats, but it's in an E90. So it's not the lightest platform to work from. But yeah, the weight, unfortunately, combined with the lack of torque, isn't great on these, but you do a few modifications, you strip them out, and it does make a big difference. Finally, the road tax. Over here in the UK, this has gone up and up and up, and it's now getting to the point where it's about £700 a year. From what I've been told, people in Ireland are paying nearly €2,000 a year in road tax. But here in the UK, it's just in a bad band for road tax. And I'm sure, again, there'll be people in the comments saying, well, you buy a car like that, you've got to expect the running costs. But what I say back to that is now I'm covering 2,500 miles a year in this car, and when you weigh up taxing it for that limited mileage and the fuel, you do think to yourself, that's a lot of outlay just to go, I don't know, 2 or 3 drives a month, spending 55, 60 quid a month in road tax. But you know what? The government won't say we can't drive them. I think they'll just price us out of them, as we've seen with ULEZ coming in, which is the ultra low emission zone around here. It's just getting worse and worse for motorists as time goes on. They just keep charging for absolutely everything. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, make sure you hit that like button, consider subscribing. Plenty more content to come on the E92 M3, where we'll be trying to get it over to the Nürburgring in July. Until next time, thanks for watching.